Okay, everybody, welcome to today's episode of America Held Hostage podcast. We are back. This is episode 4 already. And so, every morning we're coming to you guys, bringing you guys the news, the things that you guys need to know about, especially during this coronavirus crisis, understanding what's going on in the world, how it affects you, always looking at it from a conservative and Christian worldview. And that's vitally, vitally important. I just wanted to remind you guys that we do have our organization called the American Conservative Movement. You can get more information on that over at AmericanConservativeMovement.com. We've got our upcoming online conference coming up next weekend on April 18th. Great lineup over there. Get the information, sign up for our newsletters. We've got a lot of really big, really cool announcements coming up. But the whole point is just to bring everybody together around conservative principles, protecting our rights, as we're seeing them being taken away constantly, which we're talking about pretty much every day here on the show. So, John, glad we're back and, breaking down the news. And again, there's so much news coming in. It's like hard to even keep up on everything that's going on.
Absolutely. We get off of our show, and this is the 4th episode of America Held Hostage. So we get off our show every day, and the updates that I send you in the DMs on Twitter, constantly I'm sending you like 15, 20 stories of stuff that I'm thinking that we can cover. And it just comes at you at the speed of sound. And I thought that we've been going at breakneck speed since Trump came down the escalator in June 2015. We've warped into hyperdrive.
Yeah.
So
it's nuts.
Obviously, we said 30 minutes. They've been bleeding into 40, 45, but we try and get as many as we can. The crowd continues to grow. We appreciate that. Continue to spread this online. Continue to share this with your friends and family, people at church, people that you know that are politically inclined, that they're not trusting or questioning the things that they're hearing. They're wondering what's going on. There's a lot of news from hard sources that we're finding is being posted and reported, but it's not being covered by the mainstream media, NBC, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News. So that's why we felt like this is a place where we can provide a service. In 30 to 45 minutes, you get up-to-date news. And if there's questions that you have about certain things, DM us or email us, contact us, and ask if there's something that we can find. That's what my uncle did today about a story that we'll get to later on. If you have a 401k, there was something that was passed in the stimulus that could allow you to dig into that 401k and not be penalized and also not pay taxes. We're going to touch on that. We're also going to touch on the unemployment numbers. That's where we're going to start. Unemployment numbers again jumped by another 6.6 million this morning. And absolutely atrocious numbers, which means that upwards of 17 million people, 10% of the U.S. workforce, is out of work in 3 weeks. This is from CNBC and Jeff Cox. This broke at 8:30 this morning with the Department of Labor numbers, so this is breaking news on the America Held Hostage podcast. 16 million Americans have lost their jobs. If you compare those claims to the 151 million people that were on monthly employment reports just 4 weeks ago, that means that 10% of the U.S. workforce have lost their job in just the last 3 weeks. Moments after the jobless claims report was released, the Federal Reserve announced a massive $2.3 billion injection into businesses and revenue-pinched governments, and stock futures jumped because of the Fed's announcement. They also, last night, without announcing, in the story, we find out that according to Fed notes, lowered interest rates to 0. It was 0.25%. They've lowered them to 0 now. So they're trying everything that they can. The Fed is now going to is now going to allow loans direct to businesses, not through banks. They're going to allow you to come up right to your local Federal Reserve branch. If you live in Kansas City, you're going to be able to apply for a direct loan right from the Federal Reserve, as they're just printing money, trying to get this economy up off the mat. The most recent jobless numbers represents a decline of 261,000 from the previous week. Last week, we were told it was 6.6 million. That was revised. It rose by 219,000. 6.9 million people lost their jobs last week. Jeff, that's our first story.
Yeah, well, and I feel like to a certain degree, looking at this, I mean, obviously this is a major hit to our economy right now. And I'm kind of, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this why, and we were talking about this the other day, is this why they are reporting, pretty much every single person that's dying who happens to have COVID-19? Is that why they're reporting that as cause of death to justify this shutdown and then justify this big bailout? Because, I mean, in all reality, when you start to look at the numbers, it's not nearly as crazy and as bad as what they've been telling us. And so then are the American people going to be, at the end of all this quarantine and self-isolation and all that kind of stuff, are we all just going to turn around and like, did we really do all that for nothing or for very little? I don't know. It's something crazy to think about.
I don't think it's crazy at all. If you're having to do liberal number gathering of data to support, okay, well, this person had cancer and it was stage 4, but they had coronavirus and died. Well, did they die of coronavirus or did they die of cancer and the coronavirus just made it worse? Well, we're not going to count it as a cancer death. We're going to count it as a COVID-19 death. That's inflating the numbers. And your government just admitted 2 days ago, Dr. Deborah Birx in the White House Coronavirus Task Force press briefing, that's what they're doing. So yeah, they're going to fudge these numbers in order to justify that they just took away your constitutional rights, your liberties, and they put you out of work. And now you're on a form of government welfare. What I wanted to say, another story yesterday, everybody knows it by now, Bernie Sanders dropped out of the presidential race. Jeff, we don't really have to worry about a socialist winning the White House. His political wet dream has already come true. We're nationalizing industries. We're going to give federal money to anyone who needs it. He didn't win the presidency, but his ideology has already won American life. And it happened at the speed of sound in the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, well, and basically his ideology has not only infiltrated the left to where they could win in the House or the Senate or whatever that might be, they've won in the Republican Party too. That's the scary thing.
That's because the dirty little secret is that there's no difference between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. You have progressives in both parties. Progressivism began under Republican President Teddy Roosevelt. It expanded under Democrat Presidents Woodrow Wilson and FDR. And the last Democrat that actually cut your taxes and actually increased your liberties was John F. Kennedy before he was assassinated. So you want to talk about fiscal conservatism. Ronald Reagan, I love Ronald Reagan, but Ronald Reagan ran deficits up the wazoo. We want to talk about, Barack Obama spent us into oblivion. Yeah, he doubled the debt. His predecessor, George W. Bush, did that as well. We were $4 trillion in debt when he took over from Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton balanced the budget. We had a $1.6 trillion surplus. So he was actually more conservative than George W. Bush because George W. Bush kept 2 illegal wars off the books. And then he doubled the debt from $4 trillion to $9 trillion, and then Barack took it from $9 to $18 trillion. There's no difference between the parties. Airline bailouts with George W. Bush, auto bailouts with Barack Obama, Medicare Part D with Bush, Obamacare with Barack Obama. I could go on and on and on. We had Iraq. Barack had Syria. Both kept you in Afghanistan. And can you tell me why we're there? We've wasted 10,000 American lives in 20 years. Spent $5 to $9 trillion rebuilding some sandlots in the Middle East. And for what? Now, we could have used that money to actually be putting Americans back to work. But no, we did it for God knows what reason. Well, now our chickens are coming home to roost. Our pants are down. We weren't prepared. We don't know what victory looks like in Afghanistan, and we're still there after almost 20 years. Well, this looks like America's Afghanistan. What's the end game? What does winning look like? How do we get back to work? Nobody can tell you. And that's what's frustrating, because the same people that made those policies are the same ones that are threatening your liberties and putting you out of a job. And they can't tell you, well, we were wrong and you can go back to work on Monday. Because bureaucrats never admit that they never admit that they were wrong. They always double down on the dumb. So our next story, this is a little bit of good news. Janet Mefford, someone that broadcasts for American Family Radio, she posted a link that Kansas overturns its limit on social gatherings ahead of Easter Sunday. The Republican-led Kansas state legislature voted to lift a ban by Democrat Governor Laura Kelly to ban religious gatherings of more than 10 people. As lawmakers, quote, "We believe that the governor's order went against our residents' constitutional rights to freely practice religion, and we're pushing back against the federally advised social distancing guidelines." This, of all things, I had to find the link from this story from the UK Daily Mail, Jeff. It wasn't even in our own country.
Yeah, and that's the sad thing, is that we're the only country that's supposed to have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to peaceably assemble. We like when you look at the entire world, we are the only country that has that as a constitutional right without limitations, at least the way it's supposed to be as written in the Constitution, right? So it's crazy that an organization from the UK had a report on this kind of a thing, as opposed to it being, broken by every single mainstream outlet, because they should be defending our right to peaceably assemble and our right to worship God as we see fit. And that right now is under attack across the country. I mean, they're arresting people for having church in their cars. Like, this is a whole different ballgame that we're facing right now. And I think that we're at this point now of, who are we as Americans? What are we as a country if we're not going to be a constitutional, country with freedom and liberty and actually defend the rule of law? Because we're at that point now of, I feel like we're almost getting to that point of no return.
If people continue to be asleep at the wheel after Easter Sunday, because in this area, come Monday, my wife will have been in quarantine for a month. She will have been off work for a month. How long will peaceable, law-abiding Americans allow this to occur? If the Constitution matters to you, then we're not being virus deniers. We're saying wear masks, wash your hands, sanitize, social distance. But at some point, you have to start questioning your government with boldness. These numbers that you keep pimping to us, they're lies. You keep revising them every day. So were you lying to me then, or are you lying to me now? When does this stop? When do we admit that we overreacted and you're going to give me back my constitutional way of life and let me go back to my job? And what's the use in staying alive if you're not living, Jeff? I keep coming back to that question. And people need to start asking that of their pastors, of their business, of the people who Are there business owners or bosses? They need to start asking that of their local, state, and federal officials. And you need to be telling them this is not of God. This is un-American.
Yeah, and I'll just say this before you go on to the next story as well, is that this is one of those things where we're either American or we're not. We're either for freedom or we're not. And I think that to a certain degree, we need to get back to personal responsibility. So if like, for example, my wife and I right now, we would not go to church because of safety. My issue is that I don't think it's the government's place to tell me and to order me to not go to church. And that's the difference. So we need to be able to take personal responsibility and stop expecting the government to have all the answers. They're supposed to be there to protect and advise on a national level, protect our sovereignty. But they're supposed to be protecting our ability to care for ourselves. They can give us advice, but they shouldn't be taking away our constitutional rights. They should be maybe advising us, and then we can make the decision for ourselves.
Next story from the Wall Street Journal. Nearly a third of American renters failed to pay rent the first week of April. Landlords are now scrambling to determine which tenants were excused because of lost jobs and which ones were using coronavirus as an excuse to just not pay. Taking advantage of a crisis so that you can pay more money. I don't know if that's being as wise as serpent and as innocent as a dove, if it's being shrewd with your money, or if that means you're just being dishonest. Building owners start means testing en masse to find out which residents are eligible to miss payments without penalty because of coronavirus-related job loss. Nearly a third of American renters failed to pay rent during the first week of April, according to this story yesterday in the Wall Street Journal by Will Parker. Landlords are scrambling to determine which tenants were excused because of lost jobs and which ones are using the coronavirus as a cover for not paying. Some jurisdictions across the country have imposed temporary eviction moratoriums, and that will enable renters to stay in their homes despite an inability to pay because of the spike in unemployment stemming from the pandemic. We'll link to that story as well, but your thoughts on that, Jeff?
Yeah, well, honestly, I was kind of surprised that like, for example, out here in California, I was surprised that they didn't put a hold on actually just paying rent and mortgage altogether, because I feel like by basically saying that owners and landlords can't evict during this time, it made it very complicated and convoluted to where there was no actually clear-cut direction for this is how we move forward. I feel like instead of the bailout that they did, it probably would have been a wiser thing to just say everybody across the country, rent and mortgage payments are going to be waived during this time. I feel like that would have been more effective, because then the entire chain is saved from top to bottom. As opposed to this kind of chaos, because even now, everybody is just sitting around like, what are we supposed to do? And that's the problem with this. Is it's too big, too crazy, and there's not enough details. And so it's like, of course, people are going to take advantage. What do you expect?
Right. I said that from the beginning. It should have been nationwide across the country, a 3-month payment freeze. Those payments then get put back onto the back end of each loan, whether it's credit card, car payment, car insurance, cell phone, whether it's mortgage, rent, utilities. If there's some sort of loan, then there's a 3-month freeze. No one pays anything. You don't have to pay it all at the end of 90 days. The payments restart at the same rate they were, because they were frozen, at the end of 90 days. And if you have a loan, you just tack those payments on to the back end of the loan. So that way, no one's losing money. It's just taking you 3 months longer to pay off that loan. Now, that seems like, I don't know, a biblical way to show some mercy, but we all know that the banks are not going to do something merciful when it comes to their money. That's businesses for that matter.
Very true.
In general. Wanted to share this from the Washington Post. This is according to a new survey that came out yesterday. Alberto E. Martinez tweeted this, and then he linked it. 77% of Americans blame China for coronavirus, including more than two-thirds of Democrats, 67%. 71% of Americans say that American companies should pull back their manufacturing from China and bring them back to the United States. 69% support Trump's tougher trade policies with China. And 54% say that China should have to pay reparations for the economic chaos they have caused. Now, this what Alberto linked to was an opinion piece from the Washington Post titled "The Coronavirus Crisis is Turning Americans in Both Parties Against China. President Xi Jinping is in trouble." The Chinese government, this article was written by Josh Rogan. The Chinese government's mismanagement of the COVID-19 outbreak and how the United States should respond are caught up in the partisan politics of Washington, but around the country, Americans in both parties are increasingly agreeing that the U.S. needs a tougher, more realistic China strategy that depends less on the honesty and goodwill of the Communist Chinese Party. It's difficult to gauge in the middle of this crisis how exactly the U.S.-China relationship is changing, but everyone now senses it will never be the same. That's probably the understatement of the year, Jeff. Political leaders in Washington and Beijing have put their war of words on hold for the moment, but it is clear that evidence that came out of China, that evidence coming out of China is that the Chinese party is planning to use this crisis for its own economic and political advantage worldwide. Inside the Beltway between New York City and Washington, D.C., Republicans attack Democrats, Joe Biden and the media, for not being critical enough of the Chinese Communist Party, but Democrats attack President Trump for saying Chinese virus and attack any Republicans who blame the coronavirus on the Communist Chinese Party as racist. But yet, a new poll shows that outside of the Beltway, the coronavirus crisis is actually bringing Americans together on this issue. Republicans and Democrats now largely agree, almost 70%, that the Chinese government bears responsibility for the spread of the pandemic, that it can't be trusted on this or any other issue, and that the U.S. should maintain a tough position on China when it comes to trade and overall diplomacy, especially if Beijing is faltering in its commitments.
Yep. Stop buying from China. I keep saying this over and over and over again, but that's what this comes down to. Stop supporting a communist country like China just because they can make stuff for dirt cheap because they're essentially using slave labor. Like, support America. Support America first. Have that mentality. Buy made in the USA. Check ingredients. Check where it's made. Check where it's manufactured. Find out what companies you're supporting with your dollar. Like, support people that promote free market capitalism because that's what actually brings people out of poverty and into wealth of any sort, right? And the other side of it too is that if we want to protect ourselves, protect our children, protect our families from another issue like this happening again, we need to stop financially supporting China and stop having so much trade and stop having so much back and forth between China and the United States. Because in all reality, if we weren't doing so much trade, there would not be so much travel coming back and forth between LA, San Francisco, Seattle, and China, which possibly that would have delayed or even minimized the ability of the coronavirus to come over here to the United States. We need to get back to stop importing so much from all these third world countries and all these communist dictatorships and become self-reliant and make it to where everybody else is dependent on us. We're not dependent on everybody else.
And I would piggyback off that, Jeff, that I agree with you totally. America first, and also do not buy stuff that's made in China. That's rather hard right now until these supply chain logistics get sorted out in the next 12 to 18 months. And it's probably going to take upwards of 2 years to refire everything and rebuild manufacturing in this country and to bring back at least a quarter of what we shipped over there. China makes 70% of the world's goods. 90%, over 90% of your antibiotics originate from minerals in China. The last penicillin factory was shut down in New Jersey in 2006 in America. We've got a problem. And I would piggyback off your thought and say that until we can bring that back, go out of your way to not buy made in China stuff. And if you can, buy things that are American. And if you can't, buy things from our allies. Things that are made in the UK, that are made in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, because at least we're all in this together. And I'll guarantee you once this is over, the Western countries that are our allies, France, Germany, the UK, Korea, Japan, South Korea, Australia, those countries are going to come loaded for bear for China, because they know that China is now making a play to use this for their own economic advantages. I just wanted to piggyback that on this last story. The poll that the Washington Post cites was run between April 3rd and April 5th. It was of almost 2,000 Americans, and it was run by the Harris poll. And the chairman said, "We rarely see a 70% consensus in today's divided world. But overall now, Americans are united that there is very little trust for anything that the Chinese government says or does, especially coming from its premier. Xi Jinping has less than half the credibility with the American people than that of Donald Trump." That's almost congressional approval type numbers of crap, Jeff. That's impressive.
Very impressive. I mean, it's hard to compete with the congressional numbers.
Our next story, found this out. One of our friends that we both follow, you know him personally, Pastor Ken Peters from the Church at Planned Parenthood in Spokane, Washington, posted this last night, and we both went, wow. Police in Greenville, Mississippi, went to Temple Baptist Church in Greenville this evening and gave everyone there a ticket for $500 because they had a drive-in service. Everyone was in their cars with their windows up, listening to Pastor Arthur Scott preach on the radio. That comes from a report from Pastor Charles Hamilton in the area, who passed it along to Pastor Ken Peters. That is outrageous, and sadly, it's in the heart of the Bible Belt, Jeff.
Yep, 100%. And the thing about that is that literally, to me, that is a direct assault on our right to peaceably assemble, because it's not like they were all sitting in pews. It's not like they were inside of a building where there's germs and stuff floating around. They're literally in their own cars, totally, separate from everybody else, practicing proper social distancing, practicing all of the guidance that's put forth by our government, and they're still fined $500 for going to church. To me, that's a direct attack on our right to both peaceably assemble and our right to worship God as we see fit.
Amen. Amen. That is unconstitutional, not only in the right to peaceably assemble, freely assemble. It also is an intrusion on your constitutional rights of freedom of speech and of freedom of religion. And at some point, I'm glad that church decided we're still going to meet. They took the precautionary steps to stay in their cars, and still they got fined. Well, you did the right thing. You took the necessary precautions, but you said, in the words of Polycarp, and you and I both know this story, a lot of people may not know this story. You go back and you do a research of some of the the first martyrs of the church. In AD 150, the bishop at the church in Smyrna was an 86-year-old man by the name of Polycarp. Roman soldiers came to him. And when you hear the term, a pinch of salt, that term started almost 2,000 years ago because Polycarp was asked by Roman soldiers to throw an offering onto the altar for Caesar. A pinch of salt. Just throw a pinch of salt on the altar to Caesar, we'll let you go. He refused. And when asked, they said, why? He said, because I do not follow Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar is Lord. I follow Christos Kyrios. Christ is Lord. And then his famous quote was, my Savior has never turned his back on me for 86 years. Why would I begin to turn my back on him now? And so the Roman soldiers took him because he refused to put a pinch of salt on the altar to Caesar. And they burned him alive. He refused. This church refused too. They got fined. But tick-tock, Jeff. Something wicked this way comes. It's time to sack up, gird our loins like a man, spiritually, and be prepared that there are going to be more Kim Davises that defy the courts and get thrown in jail for not issuing an edict to issue a gay marriage license. There's going to be more fines that'll happen. And the thing is, what's happening is it's starting with these churches on the fringes. Well, eventually, it's going to be mainline churches. And it's going to be churches where they don't claim a health and wealth prosperity gospel. They're not kooks in the town. They have been rather law-abiding and kind of milquetoast. They're coming for you too. Are you prepared for that?
Yeah.
Because this is where the Lord is going to
No, go ahead. Finish up.
Connection lost. You still there, Jeff?
Yep, I'm still here. You know, like the one thing that I'll say as well with that is that one of the things that we are looking at happening after we get out of all this coronavirus stuff is that our federal government is talking about these social distancing standards are still going to be in place even when we are going back to business and going back to work and things like that. And so I think one of the things that we're going to have to realize is that even if we can go back to work in the next month or two, I'm still predicting that they're still going to be stopping churches from gathering because that'll be a group of over 10 people or that'll be a group of over 25 people. They're going to have a cap off, and that's going to make it very difficult for churches to gather and worship God together on Sundays, even after we get out of this self-quarantine.
I had to tell one of my buddies, he's a worship pastor in Georgia, and I said, call me crazy, but our church is closed. I'm going at 11 o'clock to my church's parking lot in my car. And if nobody else is there, me and my wife are going to sing some Easter hymns from old. We're going to read the Easter story, and we're going to have our own moment of worship on Easter Sunday. Because I'll be damned, Jeff, if someone's going to keep me from worshiping my Lord in public at the church that I attend. And obviously I know that the church is the people, not the building, but it's symbolic. Yes, I'm going to civilly disobey this direct edict. And if you arrest me or fine me, I will count it joy that I am now taking up a small price of the same price that had to be paid by people like Paul, Peter, James, and John. That's our heritage. Are you ready for that? To everyone that's listening, because I'll close with a commentary in a couple minutes from a friend of mine who listened to our second episode of our podcast, and he took away 2 questions, and that's going to be my commentary. But we're going to get to a couple more stories, and then we'll end, because we're at about the 38-minute mark right now. We're seeing also from the UK Daily Mail, you're not hearing this news from American sources. That should be troubling too, because they're not reporting news, they're narrative casting, and they're engaging in confirmation bias. But from the UK Daily Mail, crime in America has decreased overall because of a mass shelter-in-place order, but looting and burglaries have become more prominent. Highlights from this story written by Matthew Wright for dailymail.com. Milwaukee police are releasing images of a suspect that they say burglarized a convenience store on the 3300 block of West Villette Street on Monday morning. NYPD have shared that they've seen a 75% increase in the number of burglaries to commercial establishments since March 12th, Jeff. That's almost a month ago. Roughly 20% of the New York PD's workforce is out sick because of coronavirus. Turlock Police Department arrested Samuel DeBleo on Friday after a witness saw him and two others trying to break into a business in the area. And in Seattle, the city has seen a 21% increase in burglaries. I can tell you we've already seen a 20 to 30% increase in the South Jersey, Philly suburb area, according to my source in a police department close by. And they have also heard that the Philadelphia Police Department is seeing the same types of numbers. And both departments have been told by their governors that unless I'll reiterate it again, unless it is a physical violence claim, take a report, don't worry about it. They've been told to stand down. And I know you've heard the same thing from your sources in California that Gavin Newsom, your governor, is doing the same thing.
Yeah, well, and out here, we are releasing criminals out of prison. We are letting them out because we need to protect them from coronavirus. And I know we've talked about some stories like that in previous episodes as well. And it's mind-boggling to me that they're surprised that crime is going up when people can't work. It's not justifying the crime. It's not justifying the looting. But what do they expect because the people that are really affected by this are the hourly workers. It's the low-wage workers. It's the people who are living paycheck to paycheck. It's not the people that are, rich and wealthy and have great incomes. They've got, 6 months of savings saved up and things like that. It's the people that are making $12 an hour working at the grocery store that they're like, what am I supposed to do? And so what does the government expect of low-wage workers? And I'm not just saying that all crime is done by low-wage workers. I'm just saying, logically, what do they expect when they take away their livelihood for months on end without end in sight, and then they act shocked that people are actually committing crimes? I don't know what's going through their mind right now.
It's a difference in worldview. What you're seeing is we know, you and I, and people that listen to us that come from a constitutional, conservative, or a Christian worldview, we come from the premise man is not inherently good. There is, to quote Ronald Reagan, there is sin and evil in the world, and we are enjoined by Scripture and the Lord Jesus to oppose it with all our might. That's what philosophers would call the phenomenology of evil, or as theologians would put it, the doctrine of sin. That's his quote. The thing is we come at it from a perspective that man is fallen and sinful, and that when left to his own devices, if he is unregenerate and unsaved, he will begin to act out. The fact that there is not more rampant crime is a display of God's common grace to man, not his redemptive grace. But the redemptive grace would lower that if it was more prevalent across the board. But people who don't have that worldview, who don't see that themselves, and they think that you're a threat to their way of life because you cling to God and guns. They think man is inherently good, and if you raped a child, but your life is threatened because of coronavirus, on your say-so, we can release you, and you won't diddle a kid again.
It's nuts. I don't understand that kind of thinking at all.
At all. But it's a display of a difference in worldviews. We believe man is sinful. They believe man is inherently good. And that's going to get you into a lot of trouble. Last story. This is in your own backyard, Jeff. We found it from Discern News, DISRN.com. I would recommend, if you're looking for a news source that does what we do, hard news, but it's alternative stuff that gets missed, DISRN.com. Download their app, go to their website, follow them. These are the guys from the Babylon Bee. They do one does satire, the other one does hard news. They're fantastic, but this is from their website, and links to a story from KCRA, channel, the NBC affiliate in California. A landlord at a California church changes the locks to stop the pastor from holding services, Jeff. A California pastor found the locks had been changed on his church when he and his congregation came to worship on Palm Sunday, after health officials, law enforcement, and the church's landlord ordered the building closed. John Duncan, pastor at the Cross Culture Christian Center in Lodi, California, had originally planned to continue holding services at his church, saying that California's shelter-in-place order violated his freedom of religion and his freedom to assemble. The church's landlord is Bethel Open Bible Church. It's Bethel's property, and they are ultimately responsible for it, and they changed the locks, Lodi Police Lieutenant Michael Minetti said. Pastor Duncan said the church had put social distancing measures in place, saying, "I'm not thrilled in general with the restriction on my religious liberties, especially during what is the Christian's most holy week." Officers spoke with John Duncan for around an hour before his service was set to begin and gave him a copy of the county's order. And he said, quote, "I don't believe that an order or a virus cancels my First Amendment rights." I would say good on that pastor too, but you're also going to see this too, another prediction. This continues to go on. This is just a display that there are going to be some Christians that are going to turn other Christians in.
Yeah. Well, and also a reminder that an order that's just created by an individual is not actually law. Law is supposed to be made by the legislative branch. The majority of these orders are not coming from the legislative branch, so it's technically, constitutionally, not even a law, but they're enforcing it as if it is. There's literally no difference between an order and a law right now, and that's a really big problem.
Well, yeah, it is a very big problem, and we need to be praying for discernment, for wisdom, for how to stand firm, for areas of what we can do to be spheres of influence, because if this doesn't show that the church is in need of revival in the West, I don't know what will, because I told my friend, my worship pastor friend in Georgia, I said, what you are seeing now is the church in the West has now, by government order and edict, been driven underground, but it's been driven underground online. So what are you prepared to do to say, no, I will not comply? Now, the thing is that there's a law, as St. Augustine said, that goes against the laws of nature. Nature of God is no law at all. So what are you prepared to do? That's the question that I'll as we now transition to our commentaries and we end for the day. So my friend, another friend, Sean, listened to our second episode of our podcast as I got more fired up. And more as we do this, you can obviously hear and see this is who I am, passionate guy, articulate. He said you need to show more of that personality after the first episode, so I started to. But then he said, if I have something to add, I'll text it to you and let you know. And after the second episode, he said this, and this is the commentary for me to end the day. He had two vital questions that I took away from Tuesday's podcast that Christians everywhere need to ask themselves. One, when is the church going to be the church? And two, if Jesus said a disciple is no better than his master, are we ready for that kind of sacrifice? And will you consider it joy if the government fines you or jails you because you want to worship your Savior on a Sunday, let alone on Easter Sunday?
Yeah, it's I don't know. This world that we're in is just crazy. I never thought that we'd be in this place. And so one of the things that I wanted to close with as well is I wanted to bring up Pastor Ken Peters, who we had talked about earlier. He's the founder of the Church of Planned Parenthood. So he posted on social media that he was actually involved in the faith leaders conference call that was with President Trump the other day. And so he posted this. And this was his recap of their phone call with our president. He said, and this is Pastor Ken Peters talking, "What a privilege to be on a conference call an hour ago with President Trump, Vice President Pence, and Franklin Graham, and many other faith leaders. It was beautiful. President Trump felt so bad that we couldn't gather this Easter like we normally would and expressed his sincere condolences. He also expressed how important a personal relationship with Jesus is, wished us a happy Passover, and called for a time of prayer and Bible study. It was precious to hear Franklin Graham say to the president in front of all of us, 'Our country would be in trouble if you weren't the president. I thank God for our nation's leadership. We couldn't have better.'" And the thing that I wanted to highlight there is that clearly President Trump has flaws, but the thing to remember is that we all have flaws. Nobody is perfect, and that's something that I think we need to remember as well. But the thing that I appreciate about the fact that we have President Trump in office versus a lot of the other candidates that have been up that were running against him, Hillary, Obama that was before him, and that sort of thing, is that he is actually pro-Christian. You can question his sincere faith, you can question, a lot of things about him, but he is a very pro-Christian president. He has been quite constitutionally conservative on a lot of issues, not all issues, but on a lot of issues, way more than many other previous presidents. And the thing that I appreciate is that he is engaging with Christian leaders. He's actually praying, he's encouraging them, and he's whether you think it's lip service or not, what he's doing is actually being pro-Christian, pro-faith, pro-religion. And I appreciated that, especially when we are in this crisis, because there could be another president that could be in place and they could have no sympathy at all for believers that are going through this. So that's one thing. I'm not saying, I'm going to be a hardcore MAGA person and just fall into line with like a lot of other crazy people do. I'm just saying I'm thankful that he's praying. I'm thankful that he's pro-Christian and that he is doing what he can to defend our faith. So that's my closing commentary. So, but yeah, again, as always, John, there's always so much news. I feel like we could have a new episode every 3 hours and it would be, a full episode. It's crazy. It's going to be crazy to see what the next 24 hours holds.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this 30-minute podcast is going to become an hour long pretty quick because there's just so much that's coming at us, and it's an honor, it's a privilege, it's a blessing to be able to use my communications degree now in a way that is informative, that is allows me to show my giftings and my passions. But my dad always said. Why is the Dead Sea dead? Because it has no outlet. It goes from the Sea of Galilee down the Jordan River into the Dead Sea. He said, you never want to be a reservoir of blessings. You always want to be a channel. And so anything that we learn, you want to be able to share it. So that's what I'm trying to do. And then we're trying to tell other people, share this with your friends and family, your coworkers, people that need encouragement, people that need more news. Because ultimately at the end of the day, and Jeff, I think you would agree, that it's good to be informed, but ultimately our hope is not in this world. Our hope comes from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. Our hope comes from the God who created nothing, ex nihilo, and that, as George W. Bush said, we may be small in his universe, but we're still precious in his sight. And that hope is the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is what we will celebrate, his sacrifice tomorrow on Good Friday and his resurrection on Easter Sunday. And ultimately, that is the hope right now that our world desperately needs, because we are experiencing something that none of us have ever seen before.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And so yeah, make sure everybody tune back in tomorrow. We'll be back here at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Just as a reminder as well, for our plugged-in members only, right now we are going through a series of via email which is included as a free perk if you are a member of Plugged In. It's called 12. It's 12. It's a weekly devotional that we're putting out. Every month we cover a different topic. Right now I'm diving into the Easter story and how that relates to us. And so I'm leading the devotional this month. Every month we have a different person writing the devotion, a different topic, and then at the end of the year we're going to compile it and actually put it out as a print devotional for 2021 as well. So, but if you guys would like that, you guys can go to gatekeepersonline.com/12, TWELVE. Check out the devotional, see if that's something that you're interested in. And then to be a Plugged In member, I think it's like $10 a month. You can sign up, you can join, and then you'll get that every single week. Again, I'm going through the Easter story right now and kind of leading that devotional with a reading plan, memory verse, all that kind of stuff. So check that out, gatekeepersonline.com/12. We will see you back here tomorrow, 9 a.m. Pacific time, another roundup of the daily news. And then, we shall see you guys then.